everyone, my name is Anabel and welcome to my research project titled Food Insecurity Response Analysis on Oahu. First and foremost, I would like to thank Papa Jack for giving us this wonderful opportunity to engage in independent research over this summer through the Kay Fellowship. So first, I want to start off by defining food insecurity. Food insecurity is anything from anxiety about getting your next meal to actually cutting back the quality and quantity of food that you're receiving. The green side of this meter, food security, is where we want everybody to be, having enough healthy and nutritious food to lead a healthy and active life. Then we have hidden or marginal food insecurity, which is where you're anxious about getting your next meal, but not actually restricting the quality and quantity of your food. Then we have household and child food insecurity, which are the two worst types of food insecurity, in which household members, adult members, are cutting back the quality and quantity of their food, or child members of the family are restricting their food intake. And according to Children's Health Watch, this is the worst type of food insecurity as it can affect the developmental stages of a child's life. So my three research goals, beginning with the first one, was to have a deep understanding of the extent of food insecurity on Oahu and its health impacts on different communities and what ways we can aid people. My methodology was examining how the COVID-19 pandemic affected the Hawaii's food insecure population as well as its food aid programs. So that I used statistical analysis as well as geographic information systems such as ArcGIS to help me visualize this data. Thirdly, I wanted to synthesize a framework for deciding between in-kind and cash aid. In-kind being things like canned goods and a box of produce that you would receive from the Hawaii Food Bank, and cash aid being things like food stamps and EBT. So returning to the first goal, I'm going to start and give a little bit of background of food insecurity on Oahu. About 136,190 Hawaii residents suffer from food insecurity according to Feeding America in a 2020 study. That's about 1/10 of Hawaii's residents. Worse than that, 1/4 or 25% of Hawaii's children are suffering from food insecurity. That means 1 in 4 children you meet, whether that be in public or private school, are likely facing some type of food insecurity. Food insecurity is often misconstrued as being starvation or malnutrition, but it is more often linked to chronic disease such as obesity. So on this independent axis, we have the Food Insecurity Index, which was created by the Conduit Healthy Communities Institute, and then here we have the percent of adults who are obese, which is data from the Centers for Disease Control and aggregated by Hawaii Health Matters. And as you can see, there is a direct relationship between Food Insecurity Index, 0 being low need, 100 being high need. So if you're more food insecure, you're more likely to be obese, and this has an R-squared value of 0.219 and a p-value of less than 0.001. I used Python to help me make this analysis using libraries such as NumPy and Pandas and Matplotlib.
They're having a hard time here online, hearing you online, so maybe just a little bit closer to the computer.
Okay. Differing racial groups are more susceptible to chronic disease related to food insecurity. This is using data from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention 2019 study. The yellow is Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, the red is Asian groups, and the white is Hawaii residents, or the blue is white Hawaii residents. So this column is the food insecurity response, where people responded to the question, how often do you experience food insecurity? The answer was always. The percent of people who suffer from cardiovascular disease, asthma, and obesity. And as you can see, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders are consistently more likely to have these chronic diseases. Also, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders are 2.5 times more likely to have diabetes than their white counterparts. So moving on to kind of my methodology and examining how the COVID-19 pandemic affected Hawaii's food insecure population and the food aid programs, I decided to create the research question, what is the best way to mitigate pandemic exacerbated food insecurity on Hawaii? So what are the best ways that we can help to reduce food insecurity on Hawaii that was worsened by the pandemic but not entirely caused by? Food insecurity has lasted before the pandemic, lasted during it, and will outlast the pandemic. The first idea that I had for this was volunteering, so I decided that that kind of work was very important for my project, and I volunteered regularly over the summer at a local food distribution so that I could become involved in my community. This is a picture where we served over 200 people food, and yet we were still turning people away at that distribution. So I decided to look at two main umbrella organizations in Hawaii that work to serve food insecure populations. That's not to say there's many other different groups that help to serve people, but I decided to combine these into two main groupings. So the first is In-Kind Food Aid, which is the Hawaii Food Bank. They give you actual food that you can take home to your family. And then there's Cash Aid, which is funded by the Governmental Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which gives credits through the Electric Benefit Transfer, or EBT program, which you can spend on food and only food, not toilet paper, not alcohol. And then the populations that these serve are families restricting quality and quantity of nutritious food, as well as especially vulnerable groups such as Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, and children and seniors. So what were the effects of COVID-19 on food insecurity? Many people realized that people were suffering due to the pandemic, due to economic issues such as unemployment and inflation, and so they started to donate to organizations like the Hawaii Food Bank, and there was huge federal aid packages and government grants to give to programs like the Hawaii Food Bank. So in 2019, the revenue increased by 5%, but after the shock of the pandemic, the revenue of the in 2020 increased by over 55%. However, in the following fiscal year, this attenuated by 38.9%. So the revenue is still growing, but at nowhere near the levels that it was in 2020. As Kama'aina become more and more reliant on the food aid programs that we created in 2020, it becomes difficult when the food aid programs lose funding. So that's what what an emergency funds vacuum means, when all of these private donations and governmental grants are being tapered off, and it leaves a kind of issue where people are struggling. So this is a map made in ArcGIS. So food aid distribution centers, which are the red areas, these are partner agencies with the Hawaii Food Bank. They aren't necessarily made by the Hawaii Food Bank, but they partner with the food bank to help distribute the food in their local communities, and they're able to make different ways to sign up for these programs, and they have a lot of control over who they give the food to. And so these are all clustered around the urban area of Honolulu, which is also where the Asian population is the most predominant race. Asian population is this light pink area, and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders are this purple. So as you can see, the distribution centers are really clustered around this area. And then if we look at where grocery stores are clustered, we can also see they're all clustered around this area according to the Urban Observatory project in 2022. So if people have access to grocery stores, it doesn't make as much sense for them to also have as much access to distribution centers. Rather, if they were given a credit like EBT, they could return to the grocery stores themselves. However, having more grocery stores in areas like the West Side and Hau'ula, which coincidentally also have more Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, they could have access to these distribution centers so that they can get healthy food rather than being expected to go to a grocery store, which is not as accessible in these areas as it is in the urban center of Honolulu. So contextualizing what we just looked at in the ArcGIS maps, in-kind food aid, like the Hawaii Food Bank, canned goods, actual food that is given to you, is better in areas with less access to grocery stores. So, like I said, West Side, Hau'ula. And then cash aid, according to my research, would be more beneficial for those in urban areas who have regular access to local markets, so grocery stores, and they can return more than the monthly distribution that like my local food distribution does. They can return more regularly and get produce at more regular intervals. So moving on to the last research goal, which is to help synthesize and adapt a framework for deciding between these two kinds of aid. I wanted to recommend this framework to allocate food aid program resources most efficiently, because as we are entering this emergency funds vacuum, it is really important to make every single dollar count for food aid programs. This is a diagram that from the Food and Agriculture Organization of a way to do response analysis for developing countries. We can talk more about that if somebody has questions about it, but we can move on for now. So that's how I came across the Market Information and Food Insecurity Response Analysis, which was created by Barrett et al. 2009 under a CARES grant and adapted from the Food and Agricultural Organization's framework for food insecurity response analysis. This process allows for marginal improvements in your response analysis rather than big changes when something like an emergent situation like the pandemic happens, but rather you're constantly adjusting your program, monitoring how your program's doing in its different communities, and making those marginal changes and planning for emergencies in advance. So to give a microcosmic example of how we can apply the market information and food insecurity response analysis, I decided to use my locality of Pololo to describe what this would mean. So right now we have an in-kind distribution in Pololo, but Pololo has grocery stores really close to the area. There's one right outside the valley. So funds are granted to a parent organization, being the Hawaii Food Bank. The Hawaii Food Bank makes all of the decisions of where and when to buy the food and where to give this to different partner organizations that are directly in Pololo. And these partner organizations can make different barriers as to how people sign up for these food distributions. So for example, my local food distribution requires people to sign up over on either on the phone or using an internet sign up, which can be a barrier for people that don't have stable access to internet or a phone. And it also requires people often to drive up in a car, which can be another barrier as not everybody has access to an automobile. There is a way to do walk-ins, but it's an extra step to have to sign up for that. And then they receive food from the parent organization. So the alternative to this kind of in-kind distribution would be the cash aid assistance, which would be EBT or food stamps, in which people receive the credit directly and can go to the grocery store that's nearby and buy the food more often than once a month and buy lettuce, which goes bad, or other nutritional food like that over the span of the month rather than just one big distribution. This also is less managerial overhead, according to Bear et al. 2019, which is one of the benefits of preferring cash assistance rather than in-kind food assistance, especially for those in urban areas. So some of the implications of this is that where food aid is distributed has the potential to reduce food insecurity. I plan to testify in the 2023 legislative session to support similar bills as HB 1742, which appropriated funds for Hawaii Food Bank. I definitely think the food bank should always be as funded as possible, but advertisements in more rural areas like Hauula and the West Side can help to put more food aid distribution centers in those areas. And SB 2982, which is funding for local food hubs. Local food hubs help to give local farmers more of a steady income and also encourages them to farm more local food. And part of the market information and food insecurity response analysis is to prioritize local and regional purchases of food to help stimulate the economy, which helps create long-lasting benefits rather than helping to put a bandage on the program, which is what food aid programs do. And then constant programming, monitoring, and reevaluation allows for better emergency planning rather than going with the status quo and then really struggling when an emergent situation like the COVID-19 pandemic breaks out. Some of my reflections and advice for future Kay Fellows is that food insecurity is an extremely prevalent issue in Hawaii, and future research needs to be done on public policy planning. So if this is something that interests you, there's definitely a lot more room for research in this area. I also think that interdisciplinary research initiatives can be really beneficial. I was able to combine social science with coding, with mapping, and so you can really put all of your interests together to explore over the summer. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Chin for helping me narrow my research topic down at the end of last year. I'd like to thank Ms. Okamura for being an amazing guide in her computer science knowledge, Ms. Allison Blankenship for inspiring me to engage in community level research and really love the community where I'm from and help to serve my locality, which is Pololo Valley, through her dedication to the CAI program. I want to thank Ms. Mario Turbio for taking the time to engage with me about the food bank's work and also getting me private data, which is often not open to the public, from the food bank. And then Mr. Vincent Kimura for giving me really great insight into Hawaii's food systems and inspiring me to learn more about local food. I want to thank Papa Jack again for providing this amazing opportunity for independent research. And finally, Dr. Chan for being an amazing research advisor and supporting me through every step of the process. I really appreciated all of your help over this summer. Here are some of my links and the API citations. Thank you so much for attending. Here's a Story Maps link. You have to sign in, but it'll give you a more in-depth look into my maps. Thank you so much.